Friends, welcome back. Today, I want to talk to you about something that is happening right now, something that is being reported in the financial press, but something that I think is being fundamentally misunderstood by the mainstream commentators. We are seeing reports, substantial reports from the Financial Times and others, that Donald Trump, the man who built his entire political persona on being the tough guy, the deal maker, the economic nationalist who would bring the world to its knees, is preparing to back down. He is preparing, it seems, to remove the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Now, the liberal press, they look at this and they say, you see, he failed. His policy was bad. Mark Carney outsmarted him. And on a superficial level, that is true. But if you stop there, if you only look at the political theater of one man winning and another man losing, you are missing the much deeper, much more important lesson about how global capitalism actually works in the 21st century. You are missing the structural reality that constrains even the most boisterous, loud-mouthed president. Let's be very clear about what happened here. This was not just a mistake. This was not just a tactical error. This was a collision between political fantasy and economic reality. Trump imposed these tariffs, 50% on steel, expanding to consumer goods, washing machines, ovens, because he told the American working class a story. It is a story we have heard before, a story that has been used by demagogues for centuries. He told them, your pain, your stagnant wages, your crumbling communities, they are not caused by the system of capitalism. Oh no, they are caused by foreigners. They are caused by Canada taking advantage of us. They are caused by bad trade deals. It is a seductive story. It is a powerful story, but it is a lie. And what we are seeing now with this retreat, with this humiliating walk back, is the collapse of that lie when it hits the hard concrete of the capitalist market. Think about what tariffs actually are. When a government slaps a tariff on imported steel, they are essentially telling their own population, you will pay more. They frame it as punishing the other country. We are going to stick it to Canada. But who pays? The Financial Times knows. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York knows. They did the studies. They found that nearly 90% of the economic burden of these tariffs fell on American firms and American consumers. This is crucial to understand. When you raise the price of steel, you don't just hurt the Canadian steel mill. You hurt the American construction company that needs to buy that steel to build a bridge. You hurt the American auto manufacturer that needs that steel to build a car. And because those capitalists, those American employers, are driven by the profit motive, that is their job, that is what the system demands of them. What do they do when their costs go up? Do they absorb the cost? Do they say, oh, well, we will make less profit this year for the good of the nation? Of course not. That is not how capitalism works. They pass the cost on to you. They raise the price of the car. They raise the price of the washing machine. Or if they cannot raise prices because of competition, they cut costs elsewhere. And where is the easiest place to cut costs? Labor. They fire workers. They suppress wages. They close factories. So here you have the supreme irony, the tragedy of this economic nationalism. A policy sold to the American worker as a way to protect them actually becomes a mechanism to exploit them further. You are paying more for your goods, your job is less secure, and your employer is squeezed, all so a politician can stand on a stage and look tough. And why did Trump have to back down? Why is he looking for wiggle room, as the officials say? Why are they calling it nimble and nuanced instead of what it is, which is a defeat? Because the capitalist class in the United States, the people who actually run the economy, not the politicians who talk about it, they had enough. You see, the American business community, the Chamber of Commerce, the manufacturers, they tolerate Trump's rhetoric as long as he cuts their taxes. They love the tax cuts. They love the deregulation. They will put up with a lot of noise and chaos if it means their bottom line is padded. But when the tough guy act starts to actually cost them money, when the tariffs start to disrupt their supply chains, when the retaliation from other countries starts to hurt their exports, then the phone calls start being made. Then the pressure mounts. The reports say Trump's approval rating is declining because of an affordability crisis. What does that mean? It means inflation. It means the cost of living is going up. And why is it going up? In part because of these very policies. You cannot disrupt the global supply chain of basic industrial materials like steel and aluminum without causing ripples throughout the entire economy. And when the price of everything goes up, the working class, which is already living paycheck to paycheck, which has not seen a real wage increase in 40 years, they feel it immediately. And Trump, for all his bluster, is a political animal. He knows he has midterm elections coming up. He knows that if the economy is tanking, if prices are soaring, if businesses are screaming, he will lose. So he has to retreat. But he cannot admit he is retreating. That is the psychological pathology of the strongman leader. He cannot say, I was wrong. He cannot say, I misunderstood the economics. So they invent this language. It's a clarification. It's a nuance. It reminds me of the old Soviet jokes, where the party would announce that the harvest was a glorious triumph of socialist planning, even as the bread lines got longer. Here we have the American version. The trade war is a glorious triumph of American strength, even as they quietly remove the tariffs because they are a disaster. But let's look at the other side of this equation. Let's look at Canada, because there is a lesson there too. The report says Canada refused to surrender. It says Mark Carney and the Canadian government pursued diversification. They strengthened trade with Europe and Asia. They reduced dependence on Washington. Now, I am not here to praise Mark Carney as some hero of the working class. He is a central banker. He is a creature of the global financial elite. But what he did represents a rational capitalist response to instability. When your main trading partner, the United States, becomes unreliable, becomes volatile, becomes governed by irrational political whims, what do? You hedge your bets. You look for other markets. This is the contradiction that Trump does not understand. He thinks the United States is the only game in town. He thinks he can dictate terms to the world because the American market is so big. And 50 years ago, maybe that was true, but the world has changed. Europe is a massive economy. China is a massive economy. Asia is rising. If you tell Canada, we are going to punish you, Canada has options. They might be difficult options. They might be painful options in the short term, but they are options. And by forcing Canada to diversify, by forcing them to build bridges with Europe and Asia, Trump has actually weakened American influence in the long run. He has taught his neighbors that they cannot trust the United States. He has taught them that they need to build an economy that can survive without America. That is a strategic disaster for American capitalism. It is the opposite of America first. It is America alone. And in a globalized, integrated capitalist world economy, being alone is not a position of strength. It is a position of vulnerability. We have to understand this tariff war not as a battle between nations, but as a battle within the capitalist class itself. You have one faction represented by Trump and his advisors who believe in a kind of mercantilist, protectionist capitalism. They think wealth is a zero-sum game. If Canada has a dollar, that's a dollar America doesn't have. They want to use the state, the government, to smash competitors and grab the wealth. Then you have the other faction, the globalists, the neoliberals, the Mark Carneys of the world, who believe in free trade, in open markets, in the integration of capital across borders. They believe that if everyone trades, the pie gets bigger, even if the slices are distributed incredibly unequally. What we are witnessing is the failure of the protectionist faction. They tried to use the blunt instrument of tariffs to rewire the global economy, and the global economy pushed back. The market, that mysterious force we are always told to worship, rejected Trump's policy, not because it was morally wrong, but because it was inefficient, because it hurt profits, because it disrupted the flow of capital. And who is caught in the middle of this fight between two factions of the elite? You are. The worker, the consumer. You are the one paying higher prices for washing machines. You are the one worrying about your job at the steel plant. You are the one watching your real wages shrink as inflation eats away at your grocery budget. Trump promised that the foreigners would pay. China will pay. Canada will pay. Mexico will pay. It is always the other. It is always someone else. But the system is designed so that the costs always flow downward. They flow down the corporate ladder until they hit the bottom, and the bottom is us. The bottom is the people who work for a living. When the Federal Reserve Bank of New York says 90% of the burden fell on U.S. firms and consumers, they are validating what Marxists have said for 150 years. Capitalists do not pay for crises. They shift the burden of crises onto the working class. If taxes go up, they cut wages. If tariffs go up, they raise prices. They protect their rate of profit at all costs. That is the prime directive of the system. And Trump, for all his rhetoric about being a populist, about fighting for the forgotten man, is just another manager of this system. He is a different kind of manager. Yes, he is louder. He is ruder. He breaks the polite norms of diplomatic cocktail parties. But look at the results. Look at the material reality. Has the lot of the American worker improved because of these steel tariffs? No. Costs went up, chaos ensued, and now he is backing down. This reversal is humiliating for him because he personalized it. He made it about his own strength. I am the tariffs man, he famously tweeted. Well, the tariffs man is surrendering, but he is not surrendering to Canada. He is surrendering to the laws of capitalism. He is surrendering to the fact that you cannot run a modern economy on the economic theories of the 17th century. It is important to notice how the media frames this. They focus on the personality. Trump is humiliated. Carney is vindicated. It becomes a soap opera, and that serves a purpose. It distracts us from asking the systemic questions. Why do we have a system where the whim of one man can disrupt the livelihoods of millions? Why is our economic security dependent on whether the president is in a good mood or a bad mood regarding Canadian aluminum? Why do we accept a world where trade wars are fought by millionaires and billionaires, while the casualties are the workers who lose their jobs and the families who can't afford a new oven? That is the question we should be asking. Not just did Trump lose, but why was he allowed to play this game with our lives in the first place? This entire episode exposes the fragility of the current moment. We are in a period of declining empire. The United States is losing its absolute economic dominance. It is still powerful, yes, but it is no longer the undisputed hegemon it was in 1950 or 1990. And when an empire starts to decline, it lashes out. It tries to use force, military force, or in this case, economic force, to maintain its position. The tariffs on Canadian steel were an attempt to use brute force to turn back the clock, to force Canada to accept a subservient role, to force industry to return to the United States, not because it was efficient, but because the government commanded it. And it failed. It failed because the economic integration of the world is too deep. You cannot untangle the omelet and get the eggs back. The supply chains that link the US and Canada are complex. Steel crosses the border back and forth multiple times before it becomes a finished car. To slap a 50% tax on that flow is like throwing a wrench into a finely tuned machine and expecting it to run better. It doesn't run better, it breaks. And when the machine breaks, the operator, in this case Trump, eventually has to pull the wrench out, wipe the grease off his face, and pretend that he meant to do it all along. But let's not be naive. The retreat of Trump on this specific issue does not mean the danger is over. The instability remains. The underlying economic problems that led to Trump, the deindustrialization, the inequality, the despair of the American heartland, those problems are still there. Removing the steel tariffs won't fix them. The neoliberal policies of Mark Carney won't fix them either. We are caught between two bad options. On one side, the chaotic nationalist protectionism of Trump, which leads to trade wars and higher prices. On the other side, the smooth, technocratic globalism of the status quo, which shipped the jobs away in the first place and created the inequality that fuels the anger. Neither side has a solution. Neither side is proposing a fundamental change in how we organize production. Neither side is talking about democratizing the economy, about giving workers control over what is produced and where it is sent. They are just arguing over the terms of our exploitation. Should we be exploited by global corporations with free trade, or should we be exploited by national corporations with protectionism? That is the choice they offer us, and frankly, it is not much of a choice. I promised we would dig into one of the most cynical and, frankly, one of the most revealing aspects of this entire debacle, the claim by the Trump administration that tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum were necessary for national security. Now stop and think about that phrase for a moment. National security. It is a phrase that shuts down debate. It is a phrase that is meant to make you salute the flag and stop asking questions. It invokes images of tanks, of spies, of existential threats to the survival of the Republic. And who did Donald Trump identify as this existential threat? Canada. Canada, our neighbor to the north, the country with whom the United States shares the longest undefended border in the world. A country that has fought alongside the U.S. in virtually every major conflict of the last century, a country whose economy is so integrated with the American economy that they are essentially joined at the hip. This is the threat. This is the danger that required a 50% tax on steel. It is laughable on its face. It is absurd. And everyone in Washington, Democrats, Republicans, the generals, the diplomats, they all knew it was absurd. Even Trump knew it was absurd. So why did he use it? Why did he invoke Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962? Here is the lesson in how the political machinery serves the economic elite. Trump used national security not because he feared a Canadian invasion, but because it was a legal loophole. It was a trick. Under American law, the president has immense unchecked power if he claims he is acting to protect national security. If he had called it what it was, a protectionist economic policy, he would have needed Congress. He would have faced debates, lobbyists, votes, delays. But by shouting national security, he could bypass the legislative branch entirely. He could act like a king, and this is a symptom of a capitalism that is in decline. When the normal democratic procedures, flawed as they are, become too cumbersome for the ruling class or its managers to get what they want, they simply bypass them. They find a loophole. They declare an emergency. They use the state of exception. This is how authoritarianism creeps in. It doesn't always kick down the door with jackboots. Sometimes it walks in through a trade loophole, wearing a suit, holding a piece of paper that says steel tariffs. And look at the precedent this sets. If Canadian steel is a national security threat, what isn't? Is French wine a threat? Is Mexican avocado toast a threat? Once you allow the executive to define security as anything that affects the economy, you have given them the power to control the economy by fiat. But let us go deeper. Why was this leverage necessary? Because the United States is losing its economic hegemony. In the post-World War II era, the U.S. didn't need to use these tricks. It was the factory of the world. It produced everything. It was so dominant that free trade was just another word for American dominance. But that era is over. Germany, Japan, China, South Korea, they rebuilt. They competed. They started making better cars, better steel, cheaper electronics. And so the American capitalist class and the politicians they buy panicked. They couldn't compete on the old terms, so they tried to change the rules. That is what Trump represents, the panicked flailing of a declining empire trying to use political muscle to regain economic dominance. If you don't buy our steel, we will hurt you. That is the logic of the gangster. It is not the logic of a confident, thriving economy. And as we have seen with this retreat, with this reported rollback of tariffs, the gangster logic failed. It failed because Canada didn't blink. They knew, as Mark Carney knew, that the U.S. needs Canada just as much as Canada needs the U.S. The supply chains are too deep. You cannot bomb the harbor of your own trading partner without blowing up your own ships. And this brings me to the role of the media in all of this. Throughout this entire saga, what did we see on the news? On Fox News, we saw Trump the hero fighting for the forgotten man against the evil globalists. On MSNBC and CNN, we saw Trump the villain, the chaotic madman alienating our allies. Both of these narratives are superficial. Both of them miss the point entirely. They treat politics as a personality contest. Is Trump smart? Is he dumb? Is Trudeau handsome? Is Carney clever? Who cares? These are individuals filling roles scripted for them by the economic system. The media refuses to talk about the system. They refuse to say the word capitalism. They refuse to analyze why a steel tariff in Pennsylvania hurts a construction worker in California. They treat the economy like the weather, something that just happens to us, rather than a system of social relationships that we create and that we can change. The media doesn't want you to understand that the affordability crisis hurting Trump's poll numbers is a direct result of the profit motive. When tariffs go up, corporations protect their margins. They pass the cost to you. That is a choice. It is a choice made by boards of directors. It is not a law of physics. If we had a different system, if we had an economy where workers decided what to do with the profits, do you think they would vote to raise prices on their neighbors to protect a CEO's bonus? I don't think so. So where does this leave us? We are at the end of this specific chapter. Trump is retreating. The tariffs on Canada will likely be lifted or clarified into oblivion. The liberal establishment will declare victory. They will say, see, the system works. The adults are back in charge. Do not believe them. Do not be fooled. The normal they want to return to is the same normal that destroyed the Rust Belt in the first place. It is the same normal that shipped jobs overseas to exploit cheaper labor. It is the same normal that led to the desperate anger that got Trump elected. If we just go back to the status quo, to the neoliberal consensus of Mark Carney and the Financial Times, we are just resetting the clock for the next Trump, for the next demagogue who comes along and says, I alone can fix it. The problem isn't tariffs versus free trade. That is a false dichotomy. That is a choice between being shot or being hanged. The problem is who controls the production, who owns the steel mills, who owns the factories, who decides where the investment goes. As long as a tiny minority of people, the employer class, the 1%, make those decisions, they will make them for their own benefit. They will use tariffs when it suits them, and they will use free trade when it suits them. And you, the worker, will be the collateral damage either way. We need a different way. We need to democratize the enterprise. We need to bring democracy into the workplace. Imagine a steel mill owned and operated by the workers who work there. They wouldn't need a trade war to protect their jobs. They wouldn't need to exploit workers in another country. They could coordinate with worker cooperatives in Canada. They could plan production based on human need, not on the frantic, chaotic pursuit of profit that drives these trade wars. This retreat by Trump is a sign of weakness, yes, but it is a weakness of the entire system. It shows that the old tools don't work anymore. The empire is fraying. The political class is confused. The media is distracted. And that, my friends, is exactly why we need to be clear-eyed. We need to organize. We need to educate ourselves. We need to understand that the solution to a trade war isn't a better trade deal written by bankers. The solution is to change the class structure of production itself. The next time you hear a politician, whether it's Trump or Biden or anyone else, tell you that they are going to fight for you by attacking another country's economy, remember this moment. Remember the steel tariffs. Remember the high prices. Remember the failure. And ask yourself, isn't it time we stopped fighting each other for crumbs and started fighting together for the bakery? That's all for today. I hope this analysis has been helpful to you in cutting through the noise. As always, I look forward to your comments and your questions. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work. Thank you.